Hey, Whipsnappers, this is Tortimer the Great. Welcome back to another exciting episode on the Tortimer the Great gaming channel. Today we're going to be starting a kind of intermittent series in honor of Pokemon Day. This day, February 27th, 20 years ago, Pokemon was first unleashed upon the world with the release of Red and, well, actually it was the release of Red and Green in Japan. And so in honor of that momentous occasion and, you know, the impact that the subsequent franchise has had on the lives of, you know, myself and I'm sure many of you guys out there, I've been planning to do this series for a long time and just never really gotten around to it. And I figured, you know what, this might be a great opportunity for me to kind of kick this off. And so today we're starting the intermittent series of Tortimer's Top 10s. What we're going to be examining today is my top 10 favorite Kanto Pokemon. So those Pokemon from the first generation, the original 151, what are my favorite Pokemon? And so we're going to run down the list, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of why I've chosen what I have. But obviously, disclaimer, these are my, you know, totally subjective favorite Pokemon from the first generation. You will probably have very different Pokemon that you love, and if your Pokemon is not found on this list, I mean no disrespect, feel free to let me know in the comments down below which Pokemon are your favorites. But in you know, honor of Pokemon Day, I figured I would run down my favorite of the original 151. Let's do it. Number 10. My 10th favorite Pokemon, and I've got to tell you, I love the original 151 a lot. There's very few Pokemon in this generation that I don't have some sort of at least nostalgic love for. And so whittling it down to 10 Pokemon was extremely difficult. And so, you know, this Pokemon's place on this list is in no way a poor reflection on it, but it's like, it's in the top 10 of 151 Pokemon that I, for the most part, like very, very much. But the number 10 Pokemon on this list is Lapras. And Lapras is one of those Pokemon that I've always really enjoyed using in the games because it's got a great rounded stat pool and it's got a great number of moves that it can use as well. It's got great special and it's, you know, has access to so many moves that are so useful, especially in those first generation games. A Pokemon that has, you know, has access to, you know, Psychic, you know, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, all of these moves in one place is an extremely potent member of your team. But at the same time, it also was one of these Pokemon that has a very cool design and was, at least in, you know, back in the day when when these games were first coming out and like the first generation anime was first coming around and things like that, Lapras was one of those Pokemon that was always very well represented in the anime. Well, I don't know if it was the second season or how the seasons really broke up in the anime anymore, but when Ash defeated the Kanto League and went to the Orange Islands and had his own little baby Lapras that they would ride around on, that thing just melted my heart back in the day. And so I've always had a soft spot for Lapras, both from its depiction in the anime, which was just amazing, as well as, you know, the fact that it's actually a very well-rounded and useful Pokemon. Lapras has always been one of my favorite Pokemon from the original 151. Number 9. Kangaskhan. Alright, so Kangaskhan is one of these Pokemon that I've always had an appreciation for, but for the longest time never actually got to use one because of its kind of limited actual availability within the games. Now, Kangaskhan is one of these Pokemon that it's a rare find in the Safari Zone, which is towards the end of the game. You don't get there until Fuchsia City, which is the home of, like, the 6th and or 5th badge, depending on how you run through the gym circuit in Kanto, but it's pretty far into the game, so generally speaking, my team was usually pretty well put together. But my first real exposure to actually using a Kangaskhan happened just before I started YouTube, and I was running a comic on the Nuzlocke forums called the Hexath'locke, which was the predecessor to the Hexath'locke, which later was developed as a video series, which is now running on the channel. I developed that series after the 6th generation came out, making the challenge running from Pentathlocke to Hexath'locke. But in that first Fire Red run, actually I think it was a Leaf Green run that I did for that Pentathlocke comic, which never actually was completed, so I unfortunately can't direct you to this, but I, in the Safari Zone, actually caught a Kangaskhan. And Eve, the Kangaskhan, has come through many iterations on my channel. I use her regularly in Showdown and things like that, but using this Kangaskhan for the first time was eye-opening. I've always kind of liked the Pokemon from like the anime and that Safari Zone episode where you get the little Tarzan kid who lives with the Kangaskhan's and things like that. It was a very cool Pokemon, design-wise, very interesting, but until I really got my hands on it, I'd never really appreciated Kangaskhan fully. And it's a great Pokemon. I've always had a soft spot for normal types, and so Kangaskhan kind of fit in there very nicely for me. Great, power behind it, things like that. It was a dream to use Eve in that first Nuzlocke I was doing there. Well, at the same time moves on. Gen 6 comes out, and suddenly Kangaskhan is one of those few Pokemon who has been granted a Mega Evolution. And suddenly the doors are blown off the place, and Kangaskhan's one of these Pokemon that's almost unstoppable. Mega Kangaskhan is a member of the Ubers tier on Pokemon Showdowns in Smogon's, Reckoning. It's an Uber level Pokemon now because of its ability, Parental Bond, boosting, all of its attacks by about 50% and things like that. It's just such a good, well-rounded Pokemon, and really helps to kind of give a good light to one of my favorite underrated types, which is normal-type Pokemon. So, for that reason alone, Kangaskhan has made my top 10 list. Number 8. Number 8 here, I'm cheating slightly. Well, I'm cheating. I had a very difficult time, as I said at the beginning, picking out only 10 Pokemon from the original 151, a lot of which I love very, very much, was very difficult for me, especially considering that, as I said also at the beginning, the original first generation came out over 20 years ago in Japan, and I've been playing them, since I was in 4th grade, and Red and Blue came to the States. I started playing Pokemon as soon as it came to the States. Like, I've been with it the entire run of its franchise. And especially these Pokemon, we've been with these original 151 Pokemon for 20 years, 16, 18 years, however long it took them to come to the States. I think it's closer to 18 years now. I mean, so that's astounding. It shaped my entire life. And so when I try to look at these 151 creatures that have kind of helped shape me into who I am today, it's very difficult for me to, with almost 20 years of nostalgia, to pick out only 10 of them that I'm going to talk about. So you'll see here that I've cheated just slightly, and that is because I brought you a tie. For number 8, I have Butterfree and Pidgeotto. Now, these are two Pokemon that have always been a very soft spot in my heart from growing up watching the anime. As I said, I was pretty young when these first came out, probably older than some of you guys, but still pretty young. And so, watching the anime and Ash with his Butterfree and his Pidgeotto and seeing these guys and all their adventures week in and week out, it really brought them to life for me and really shined a beautiful light on these two kind of underused Pokemon. And so, you don't see a lot of Butterfrees or Pidgeottos in the competitive scene or anything like that, but they are always two that will have a soft spot in my heart. And, in some of our different runs, we've had the opportunity to use Butterfrees. Like in Hexath'locke Season 3, we had a shiny Butterfree on our team, Boss, and Pidgeottos are a good stable Pokemon to use in the early games. We've used, we had Kazooie on our team from Hexath'locke Season 1, which was obviously at one time a Pidgeotto. She evolved into a Pidgeot, but I always kind of loved the cool middle evolution there. Pidgeot's beautiful and majestic, but the cool guy was always Pidgeotto. And so these are kind of undervalued Pokemon that have always had a soft spot in my heart. Gotten to, very thankfully be able to use them a number of times in different runs, and then just their play out in the anime, almost nothing more heartbreaking than that final episode with Butterfree in the anime where Ash releases Butterfree. I mean, it's just heart-wrenching. Barely anything was quite as emotional in my childhood. But yeah, so those two, I couldn't decide between them, and I could not include them on this list. So for number 8, Butterfree and Pidgeotto. Number 7. Now, this Pokemon is one that probably wouldn't make the list of most people, and probably if I had done this, top 10 when I had first started YouTube, certainly would not have been on my list either. But Weezing and by extension, its pre-evolution Coughing is one of those Pokemon that I have grown to appreciate more and more as I have kind of delved deeper and deeper into Pokemon, because prior to my starting YouTube here, I had never touched competitive battling once. I always played through the story modes of the games, and I would play through those story modes over and over and over again. I just loved raising and battling Pokemon. It's always been a huge part of my life. But I'd never really done any competitive battling at all. The only competitive battling I'd ever done was against my brother, and he always kicked my butt because he actually knew what he was doing. So, as I get into the more competitive scene, and I start using some of these other Pokemon that I've never really touched before, I picked up Coughing at one point in my Little Cup days, and realized what an amazing wall this Pokemon is. And since that day, Coughing and or Wheezing, my Coughing or Wheezing Fumesy, has been on almost every team I have built. If I ever need a physical wall, you can bet that a Coughing or a Wheezing is going to be there. And so, for that reason alone, this little gas ball has made his way into my heart. And whereas, you know, you gotta, that's the beauty of Nuzlocke and some of these other situations you get put in, you are almost forced to step out of your comfort zone and play with these different Pokemon that you never would have before, and you just kind of peel back those layers and realize what a beautiful thing you've been missing. And Wheezing is definitely one of those Pokemon. Just always there, always got your back, always a reliable Pokemon to have on your team. So, number 7 on this list is Wheezing. Number 6. Alright, so this is a Pokemon that, in the large Pokemon community, I guess, might be a little controversial, because in terms of Pokemon itself, its pre-evolution Pikachu is kind of a big deal. Pikachu is the series franchise mascot, but for me, where it's always been has been Raichu. You know, Pikachu was great, blah, 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 but then you got Pikachu, who refuses to evolve into the obviously superior Raichu in the anime. And then, you know, one of my big complaints about the anime series is Ash goes to, you know, let's say he heads to Unova in the, you know, whatever, 5th season, whatever it is, the 20th season. I mean, but he heads to Unova, and in the first episode, Pikachu, who's gotta be level 100 by now, gets its butt kicked by level 5 Snivy or whatever. It's like, no, Pikachu, you worthless sack of fur, you need to evolve into a Raichu, because Raichu is the obviously superior Pokemon. Ever since those days, back watching the anime, and Lieutenant Surge shows up with his awesome rough and tumble Raichu, I was hooked. And so, I've always loved the Raichu line. I had this little plastic, they used to, well, I think they still make them probably, but I had all these little plastic Pokemon figurines or whatever, they were toys. And Raichu was one of my absolute favorites, and just, you know, playing with them, Raichu was one of those great Pokemon in the first generation. It learned Thunderbolt by level up. It's one of the few Pokemon still who does that. So it was just such a good Pokemon. It had good speed, good attack, decent defenses. It was a Pokemon you could rely on, and Raichu has always been the one that I want beside me when I march into war. So for that very reason, Raichu has made it onto my top 10 Kanto Pokemon list. Number 5. This is another Pokemon that I don't know if it would have been on my list 3 years ago. I honestly don't know. And honestly, it's one of those Pokemon I can't even really explain as to what it's doing here. But Wigglytuff is in my top 5 favorite Pokemon as we now move into that top 5 slots of my favorite Kanto Pokemon. Wigglytuff is sitting right there, weird and adorable. I honestly can't explain it. As a grown man, why Wigglytuff of all Pokemon is one of those Pokemon that I love so much, I can't even tell you. Honestly, until I moved into the Dice Lock and we randomly found Luna beneath Cerulean City, I'd never even used one. I've always wanted to. I always, in the back of my mind, was like, I would love to do like a solo run with just a Jigglypuff or Wigglytuff and just kind of let it go. I mean, the Jigglypuff in the anime was always really annoying, and there was never really a good representation of Wigglytuff, its evolution. But for whatever reason, its derpy little face, I've always loved it. And so for that reason, Wigglytuff is on this list. I can't even justify it. I have no idea. It just, something about Wigglytuff speaks to my soul. I don't know. But Wigglytuff is my number 5 favorite Kanto Pokemon. Number 4. Alright, so I cheated again. And I know you guys are saying, Tortimer, this is the top 10 list? Why do you have so many non-10 level, you had too many Pokemon on your list? And I would say, yeah, that's basic arithmetic, you're right, I have more than 10 Pokemon on this list. But, I couldn't, as I said, there's so many of these 151 that I love that I couldn't exclude. I mean, there's so many that I like that aren't even on this list, and you won't hear about it all today. But to exclude some of these Pokemon would just have hurt me too deeply. So, at number 4, we have Charizard and Ivysaur. And I have always loved the original starters for Pokemon have always been some of my absolute favorite Pokemon. I would never say no to any one of those 3. And I've always kind of had my preference for which of their evolutions I would choose. And if any of you guys ever played Pokemon, or not Pokemon, but Pokemon, playing Pokemon would be useful for this list. But if you guys had ever played, I almost said Pokemon again, Super Smash Brothers, and I don't remember exactly which game it is, but I believe it was the GameCube or the Wii version, whichever one they had the Pokemon Trainer on. And the Pokemon Trainer was a battler where he would throw out a Pokemon, and you would get to battle as that Pokemon on the Smash Arena. And he had one of each evolution, or he had one evolution of each of the original starters. And it just so happened that was my absolute favorite mix as a kid, and still today, of those starter Pokemon. I've always loved, of the final evolutions, Charizard was always my favorite. As the middle evolutions, Ivysaur was always my favorite. And as the starting evolutions, well, we'll get to that one in a minute. But Charizard and Ivysaur have always been 2 of my favorites. I've always loved, you know, the kind of scrappy older brother to Bulbasaur of Ivysaur. Always so cool before it blossomed into the behemoth of Venusaur. It was still kind of a cool, compact little Pokemon that you could still kind of have running around in your backyard. And I always kind of dreamed of being in that Pokemon world, so that's always kind of like my viewpoint of would I want this Pokemon in real life. And so obviously some of the Pokemon on this list probably I would not, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But Charizard and Ivysaur are 2 of my absolute favorite Pokemon just overall, nonetheless just in the Kanto region. And I know that today it's kind of, you know, cliche to say that Charizard's one of your favorite Pokemon, but he absolutely is. Just, even if it's just nostalgia, and I'll admit, nostalgia, I'm wearing nostalgia-tinted glasses here. This game, these 151 Pokemon, especially these 10 that are in my top 10 favorite list, they have been with me for, like, longer than I was alive prior to them existing. And I've always, me and my brother, both of my brothers actually, we had, you know, Game Boy Colors, and we played Pokemon when they first came out. Like, this has been a huge part of my life since I was, like, in elementary school until now. I'm a grown man who's married and has a house and a mortgage and works a full-time job. Like, it's been with me a really long time. And so, even if it's nostalgia, it's hard to argue, unless you're just a snob, that Charizard is amazing, and then Ivysaur is just the cool middle brother of the Bulbasaur line. Just so much fun. I love these 2 Pokemon so much. Number 3. As we move into the top 3 here, we have a Pokemon that is a great representation of another one of my favorite types, which I think is woefully underappreciated, and that is the Poison type. And while the Poison types have gotten a bit of a boost in recent years because of the introduction words, of the Fairy type, of which the Poison type is now strong against, for a long time it languished in kind of this place where it was kind of worthless. But I always found, you know, solace in some of these Pokemon like Nidoking. Nidoking has always been one of my absolute favorites. You know, you can get these Nidorans early on in the games, and then you get this little cute little poison bunny thing, and he evolves into this big behemoth thing, which admittedly, while the anime helped to bring to life some Pokemon in my eyes, and certainly Nidoking is no exception, but it was super disappointing the first time I saw Nidoking show up in the anime, because these things are like 4 feet tall or something, and you look at its sprite, and it looks like it should be this towering, spiky behemoth, and it's like 4 feet tall. I mean, granted, these creatures are generally dealt with by children, so I suppose it's still one of those things that would kind of tower over you, but Nidoking, he's just so cool looking. He's got these big, massive arms and legs, and he's just spiked, and he's so amazing. And I've always loved the OKing line. Recently, we've been doing the Pokemon Showdown Gray version on the channel where you guys selected my starter as the Nidoran male. And I gotta tell you, I was so excited to first hear that because I just love that line so much. They're so underappreciated. There's so much you can do with that line. You just have to really put some effort into raising them, and it's just one of the coolest looking Pokemon, and it's actually more useful than I think people give it credit for. As I've shown, you know, we've been battling in the Uber tier recently, even with the OKing, and he's managed to not be totally useless. And so for sheer cool factor, and just being a nice representation of one of my favorite underappreciated types, OKing has always been a very dear Pokemon to me, and is in my top 3 favorite Pokemon of the Kanto region. Number 2. Alright, so my second favorite Pokemon in the Kanto region is Snorlax. And you guys may not be totally surprised by this. I use Snorlaxes a lot, or members of the Snorlax line, at least I should say, whether it's Crew. In my Pokemon Showdown series, Crew was the Munchlax was a long-time member of my Little Cup teams there. Snorlax has always been one of those Pokemon that, while in real life I would not want to own a Snorlax, these things would eat tons of food a day. It would be absolutely unsustainable to actually own a real Snorlax. But for whatever reason, this large normal behemoth has always captivated me, whether it's in the original games where he's kind of this weird monster that's blocking the paths and you have to get the Poke-Flute, and he's such an integral part to that game. But you catch one then, you manage to get him on your team, and he's bulky, and he's powerful, and he's just so amazing. I've never, ever had any doubt in my mind that Snorlax was going to be on this list, and almost near the top. I mean, he's just... It's hard for me to express how much I love Snorlax. Whether it's in the game, I never turned down getting to use one. In Pokemon Showdown, he's made regular appearances on my teams, and to great effect. I think he dominated when we were in the UU tier. People could barely get through him. To, you know, just watching him in the anime and Ash's Snorlax just devouring everything in sight. I mean, it's such a fun character and creature that these guys have come up with, and I've always loved Snorlax. So, for that reason, he is up here at number 2 of my favorite Kanto Pokemon. Honorable mentions. Now, before we move into the coveted number 1 slot, which may or may not end up being a surprise to you guys, but before we move into that coveted number 1 slot, I wanted to run down a couple of quick honorable mentions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but these are some Pokemon that were very close to making it on this list, and so I wanted to give them a quick recognition. I've got 3 Pokemon here that I want to mention. I've got Muck, Sandslash, and Primeape. And these 3 Pokemon are 3 that I have always kind of loved, whether it be because of from the anime with Muck's antics, you know, being in love with Professor Oak and things like that. Sandslash is just an amazing, you know, the spiky, bald armadillo guy. Sandshrew was one of those first Pokemon that I always loved. And actually, before Pokemon even hit the public stream of knowledge, Sandshrew was one of those first Pokemon that I had kind of tagged onto. And like one of my art projects in elementary school, I did a it was called the Dancing Armadillo, but it was a Sandshrew, and nobody knew what Pokemon was yet, so people assumed I was just amazing and creative. But Sandslash is just an amazingly cool-looking Pokemon, and I'm so excited that in recent generations, Sandslash has actually gotten a better level-up pool, so that it's not even like a worthless Pokemon. Because some of these are so cool-looking, but in the end, it's taken them forever to get to a point where they're actually viable Pokemon to use. And so Sandslash's much better level-up pool has been very cool for somebody like me who uses or plays a lot of single-player story mode Pokemon. So. And then Primeape, you know, from the anime, Ash's, you know, wild and crazy Primeape to just constantly doing Pokemon runs and picking up a Mankey early on in the game, and we've had Zelda and Zoe and a lot of these, you know, Mankeys and Primapes that we've had on our teams throughout the years. A very reliable Pokemon, a very cool Pokemon, and so that's why these 3 are in my honorary mentions list. Number 1. Now, here we are, the big show that you guys have been waiting for all along, and I've been going on, and so I'm sorry that you guys have had to wait so long. But my #1 favorite Pokemon in the Kanto region is Squirtle. I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anybody. I think a lot of you guys know that Squirtle is one of my absolute favorite Pokemon of all time. Nonetheless, the original 151, Squirtle may be at the top of my list for all 700 and whatever Pokemon there even are anymore. So, I don't think it comes as any surprise that this little blue turtle is the top Pokemon on this list. 18 years ago, when I first started playing Pokemon, when it first came to the States, Squirtle was, without a doubt, there was no hesitation, Squirtle was my starter Pokemon on my first ever Pokemon adventure, and every time since then. I've dabbled with Charmander and Ivysaur and Bulbasaur because I love both of those Pokemon as well, but they can't even touch. In my heart, this old Tortoise's nostalgia button is getting pressed by a Squirtle. Squirtle is just everything I've always wanted to be, and I'm a little weird. And maybe it's not surprising given my affinity for the Little Cup tier and things like that, but I have always loved Squirtle more than even Wartortle, his cooler older brother, or Blastoise. Blastoise is a giant turtle with cannons on its back, and for me, it's always been Squirtle. And I don't know if that's because in the anime, Ash's Squirtle never evolved, and you had the Squirtle Squad, which is full of these mischievous, awesome Squirtles. I don't even know. I have no idea what it is, but this adorable little blue turtle has always been near and dear to my heart, and is my absolute favorite Pokemon in the Kanto region. The original 151, there's only one for me, and that is Squirtle. So, I don't think that's a surprise to any of you guys, but there it is, my top 10 list for the original 151 Pokemon. Those are my favorites. And so, as I said at the beginning, this is my subjective list. Obviously, these may not be some of your favorites. You may not agree with some of the ones on my list, but again, it's my list, so get over it. If you got other choices that you guys want, let me know. You want to argue, for some of your favorites, feel free to put them in the comments down below. I'd love for you guys to let me know what some of your favorites are, because this is such a rich game that's been with a lot of us for so long, and some of the creatures in this is just mind-blowing. And so there's going to be a lot of different favorites out there, and I look forward to hearing from you guys what those are. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been the first installment of Tortimer's Top 10s. It went a little long, and so I apologize for that. I kind of just sat down and went through it, but I thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys will join me in celebrating on this Pokemon Day, February 27th. 20 years ago today, Pokemon first entered the world. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Tortimer the Great, and you guys have been great. Make sure those likes, comments, subscriptions for me, guys, and I'll see you all back here next time. Alrighty, guys, have a good one.